Here we go. All right. Welcome, everybody. Everybody on Zoom and everybody on Facebook. And yeah, the talk is called Heading for Extinction and What to Do About It. And before we get going, I'd like to acknowledge that we meet on stolen land where I am of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. Sovereignty was never ceded. And I'd like to pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. All right. So you're tuning in on a Thursday night to hear a talk with a depressing title that makes me think that you're not like these guys who are just pretending there's no crisis. Yeah, we're going to spend half an hour talking about some fairly depressing stuff. This is the tell the truth bit, the truth about how bad things are. Then we're going to spend some time talking about what it would be, what it would look like to act as though the truth is real, and about the rebellion, part 3. This is me. And like I was somebody always who was a bit concerned about the environment. I thought we had 100 years though. I thought the scientists were taking care of it. So I was just working as a psychologist, bringing up 2 kids, just the two boys there, not the girls that were visitors. And I really didn't, it wasn't on my radar until someone persuaded me to go to a talk. And that's where I saw this graph. It was 2007. And it was the year when the Arctic ice started melting really, really fast. And the blue area is how fast scientists thought it would melt. And the red line is how fast it was melting already in 2007. And being a sort of mathematically inclined person, the fact that it was turning exponential was the thing that struck me. And I went, oh my God. So I got on this email list. It was Philip Sutton and David Spratt, who were in the process of writing a book. They started off just writing a submission to the Garneau inquiry, but as they found out how serious things were, basically it turned into a book, which came out in 2008 called Climate Code Red. So basically every few weeks you'd get another chapter, and each chapter was basically more depressing than the one before. But the thing that I found the scariest wasn't even all the facts. It wasn't the graphs of the Arctic ice or anything. It was hearing from them that the scientists themselves were already scared. That was in 2007, right? And they were already discussing in their own private chat rooms, should we buy land in Tasmania? Should we buy land in New Zealand? And it was hearing that they were scared, I think, that really got me scared. So I started just doing whatever I could. I was part of a local group in Darebin. And we were always trying to tell people about the climate emergency message. And for a long time, it didn't really seem like we were getting anywhere much. But being part of that climate emergency movement, I was hearing all the science, I was hearing the solutions, but the thing that we were saying, and we felt that scientists were saying, was that we had 10 years. And then it was around that time people were talking about the critical decade, but it got sort of changed in the media to mean this is a critical decade when we've got to start doing a little bit of something. But in the climate movement, we knew that it was 10 years to get to 0. Like if we didn't want things to happen like the Great Barrier Reef getting wrecked, we actually had to get to 0 by this year. So we were trying and trying, but yeah, not getting very far. So about halfway through the decade, I just thought, well, what's the most important thing I can do right now? And much as I liked my job, I quit to work on the climate emergency, well, to volunteer on the climate emergency. I still do a little bit of psychology, but mainly I just work on the climate emergency, because I figure it's the most important thing I can do for my kids. So as a psychologist, the thing that has interested me is the great difficulty in getting out the message that it really is an emergency. And partly, of course, it's the campaign of lies. We all know about that. But what was starting to make me quite cross was really the campaign from our side, the problems from our side in terms of getting out the message. And this was shown very clearly when David Wallace-Wells, a wonderful journalist in the US, wrote a piece called The Uninhabitable Earth, later turned into a book, right? He put it in, it was in the New York Magazine. He was deputy editor. Within a day, it had 2 million views. But within a day, already people from our side, including climate scientists, were not criticising him on the facts so much. That was the one thing he got wrong. But they were saying, you mustn't say this stuff because fear doesn't work. You mustn't tell people how bad it is. I've literally been to a conference in Canberra with scientists talking about drawdown, And at one point, they were talking about some pretty depressing stuff, I'd have to say. I asked a question. I said, don't you think it's time to tell the public it's an emergency? And they went, oh, no, because fear doesn't work. It's right through the scientific community and the climate campaigning community. So I'm with David Wallace-Wells. I think it's much more dangerous to not tell people how bad it is than it is to tell them the truth. If the truth is scary, well, people still deserve to know the truth. We have no chance of getting emergency action if you don't tell people it's an emergency. Anyway, you can hear I get quite angry about this. It's one of the major obstacles. So I did some research. I looked into the research on messaging, and it's unequivocal. If you look at public health campaigns, there's no doubt that the thing that works is a personally relevant threat. Tell someone you're at risk of dying and the action you take. It's unequivocal. That's why you have scary pictures on smoking packets, on packets of cigarettes. And there's no debate when it comes to emergency messages. Nobody says, oh, there's a terrible fire approaching Geelong, but let's not tell anyone how bad it is because fear doesn't work. I mean, can you imagine? It's just ridiculous. And I mean, more recently, we've got an example. It's very clear. People are prepared to suffer quite a bit and take very extreme measures when they know it's life and death. But you've got to tell them it's life and death, or they won't. So it's life and death with climate. It's life and death with the pandemic, but it's life and death with climate and with the ecological collapse. So we have to tell people, but we have to tell people in a way that makes them want to act. So we want them to be angry or afraid with a clear path of action, not in guilt or despair. So what the big companies do when they want no action, say on container deposits, they use guilt, individual guilt. It's all your individual problem. You are littering. If you weren't littering, the fact that we make millions and billions of plastic bottles wouldn't be a problem. And similarly, I don't think it's at all helpful to say, look, it's really, really bad and there's nothing you can do. Just hang out with your loved ones and watch it go down. Because I think there's no doubt that each day it's getting worse, but the sooner we act, the more damage we can still prevent. So when I was still more of a psychologist, and still now, the approach I used to use was acceptance and commitment therapy, which is all about taking action based on your values, taking action on the thing that is most important to you in your life. And I think there's no doubt that that's what makes you feel good. It's when you're doing something that's important, that's meaningful. You know, it's not from going and buying a new car or buying some fast fashion. It's from doing the stuff that's really important, that when you're actually old and you look back and you go, I really lived, I did the stuff that was important. And if you can do that stuff that's important with other people, that's the best feeling. And that's Extinction Rebellion. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to shift what's called the OVERTON window. It's the area of public debate that is where policy is made. It's sort of the sensible centre. It's, you know, what people think is reasonable. Now, opponents of action have done an incredible job of shifting that OVERTON window down to make this last 10 or even 15 years of debate be, it's real, it's not real, it's real, it's not real, it's real, it's not real. They have stuck to a strong, strong, strong message. It's a hoax, they're lying, don't trust them. Climate changes all the time. They never have deviated. They've never argued with each other, and they've just gone strong, strong, strong on that. Whereas we've come right down their end and gone, oh, it's real. And go, no, it's not. Oh, yes, it's real. Oh, no, it's not. Okay, so I think we would have been a hell of a lot better back into 2010 if all the climate movement had all united around we need to declare an emergency to prevent human extinction. Anyway, better late than never, we've started, and we have to go hard on that. We have to be clear. Not everyone is going to like the message, but the point is to move that window. And it's by strong messaging that you move the window. So what is the truth? If we were going to tell people the truth, what is the truth? The first thing is that it is an emergency. So just first step is to always say it's an emergency. Don't call it climate change. The reason we have been persuaded to use climate change is because our opponents researched it way back and found that if you say climate change, it raises less concern, makes people less likely to act than if you call it global warming, and obviously much less than if you call it a climate emergency. Plus, you're advertising the denier meme. The climate is always changing, right? Every time you say climate change. So yeah, first thing, try and change your language. There's people who've been using this emergency language, like Ban Ki-moon from the United Nations, since 2007. But there's been this whole climate movement that's refused to. It's really held us back. But Extinction Rebellion, one of the real strengths is using strong emotional language that's clear. So this is Don't Mention the Emergency. I wrote this as a response to the people who were still saying a couple of years ago not to mention the emergency. It does summarise the science. I'm not going to give you all the references for the things that I say, but it's all in the book. And you can download it for free at climateemergencydeclaration.org, climate messaging. Anyway, just Google it, it comes up. So the first thing, which I think we all know, is the Earth is already too hot. Like sometimes people talk about, oh, the 2 degrees guardrail, or can we stay under 1.5? None of that stuff is relevant. Those figures are not relevant. The Earth's too hot now. We're at 1.1 degrees of warming. It's already too hot. So no use talking about 1 degree, 2 degrees, 3 degrees. The most important thing is it's too hot. And this is the other thing that's very important. This is the whole of human civilization. That's the start of settlement. Agriculture gets underway, the industrial revolution. And this is the temperature. It's been inside that band and sort of going down towards the end there. Now we've come out of that to an unprecedented temperature already. If we get to 2 degrees, it's way up here. It's not just a little bit out of the range, but we're actually heading somewhere up towards 4. And just have a look at how different that is to what humans in organised society have ever experienced. So we all know some of the impacts, right? We've just seen that we had drought that just went straight into fires, terrible loss of all the animals that died. Around the world, sea levels rising as the oceans expand, but also as the ice melts. Extreme weather, that's Hurricane Dorian in the Bahamas. That's aftermath of Superstorm Sandy. With just New Jersey, a whole large number of houses there just all becoming part of the sea. And remember the storm in South Australia that they said renewable energy had caused some problem with the power. Anyway, imagine, like, but now we have storms strong enough to do this. But the important thing is that as well as the impacts you can see in nature, quietly people are dying. They're dying of heat waves. In Australia, actually more died of heat waves than of the fires in Black Saturday. But in places like Pakistan, extraordinary high temperatures. In Europe too, tens of thousands died in some of those European heat waves. It doesn't get the headlines as much though. Another way people are dying is cities running out of water. Like if they run out of water in Australia, it's pretty bad. It's very inconvenient. But if cities run out of water in India, what happens to poor people? Like they might truck in some water, but the poor people's going to be able, are the poor people going to be able to buy it? It's not all climate, part of it's overuse. But it's human deaths that we don't even hear about. We're not even counting them. And famine. This is a locust plague. It's going on right now. Look at, it's hardly even in the headlines. But how many millions are going to die from the lack of food that comes with the locust plague? And that is related to climate. They reproduce more easily in warmer conditions. So there's not the slightest doubt the Earth is already too hot. We were not exaggerating when we said we needed to get to 0 by 2020. It's just that we didn't. So now we've got to go as fast as we can. It's similar to this situation where you're paddling along a river. You're paddling along, you think you're fine, you go around the corner, you see there's a waterfall up ahead. You're not going to waste any time. You're going to paddle for the bank, right? Because if you go over the waterfall, there's no way back. But the point of no return in the river, it's not actually at the top of the waterfall. It's some way back from there. There's no sign in the river that says this is the point of no return. And you don't really know. Like it's a bit of a flexible thing. It depends a bit on how hard you can paddle. If you paddle really hard, then the point of no return, you might be able to get back. But if you paddle not so hard, you might not. So the tipping point is the edge of the waterfall, but the point of no return is some way back from that. And that's the problem we've got with the climate emergency, because we're at about 1 degree of warming, just a bit more. There's already some momentum in the system towards warming. If we get to 2 degrees, that's where scientists say, well, it's probably going to be the point of no return. It may be before then, we just don't know for sure. If we get to 3 or 4 degrees, we're already halfway down the waterfall. There's not the slightest doubt. Once we get to 3 or 4 degrees of warming, there's no paddling back from there. So part of the momentum is to do with feedback loops. So as the ice melts, the dark sea is exposed, the Arctic gets hotter, the methane comes up from under the sea and out of the permafrost, and methane is a really powerful greenhouse gas. So that's the methane bubbles. Another thing we're doing is actually, because of the ice that's coming off Greenland, it's affecting how the currents of the earth, of the oceans move around, and we're slowing them down. So this great big current that shifts the warm water up to the north and then the cool water comes down, we're slowing it down. And it's just one of many examples of things we have no idea how bad it could get. We have no idea how fast it could go. And we have no idea how to reverse it. So we're messing with these incredibly important, powerful systems that we don't even understand that well. So this is a summary from a very eminent scientist, Hans Schellenhuber. He's the founder of the Potsdam Institute. He was advisor to Angela Merkel, Germany, advisor to the European Union, advisor to the Pope. So he's one of the most eminent scientists in the world. And his view is, and this is how he summarizes it, we're reaching the end game. Very soon we have to choose between taking unprecedented action. Unprecedented. Like not even in a war have we ever taken action strong. That's what he says, unprecedented, or accept it's been left too late. And that the issue is the survival of our civilization. It's not in the papers though like this, is it? The stuff about 2 degrees, 1 degree, you know, carbon dioxide. People don't say the issue is the very survival of our civilization and that we're at the end game. But in their journals, that's what they're saying. And another really important paper is Will Steffen, again with Hans Schellenhuber and others. And this is about the point of no return. The point of no return could be between 1.5 and 2 degrees. And staying under 2 degrees now is exceedingly difficult. Some people think almost impossible. 1.5 degrees, I think most scientists think we've pretty much missed the boat for that. So we could pass the point of no return at any point now. Hopefully not, like hopefully it's further down the track. But this is very important because it's not just the damage that we can see now. It's not just the terrible things that are happening now. It's the point of no return and we don't know where it is exactly. So this is like a 3D graph of that, right? That we had a stable Earth and we destabilized the system. So now we're sort of in this trajectory that could take us past the planetary threshold and basically over the waterfall towards 3, 4, who knows how many degrees of warming, an uninhabitable planet. Somewhere past there is where we definitely can't paddle back. But we're here. With a bit of luck, we can still paddle. So if we paddle hard, with a bit of luck, we can stabilize the Earth again. So that's your 3D waterfall graph. Now, one of the things Extinction Rebellion says that's very important is we're doing a lot of other bad stuff to the planet. It's not just climate. There's plastic and all that. There's directly climate-related things like the coral, but things like deforestation too, killing off animal species. The 6 mass extinction. It's like when the dinosaurs died, but this time it's us. Hot days, so hot that thousands of bats just fall out of the sky, that's climate. Kelp forest dying, that's climate. Hot seas. So beautiful underwater forests that we haven't even seen dying. 95% of them along Tasmania's east coast. In an insect apocalypse, this is mainly pesticides, partly climate, but mainly insecticides. And yet we need bees, we need them to pollinate our food. So sometimes people say, oh, well, you know, humans will die, but the animals will be all right. No, they won't. We're in the middle of a mass extinction of the animals as well. And when they do die out, like with the dinosaurs or at the end of the Permian period, it takes millions of years for them to recover. So let's not go, oh, they'll be all right, because at the moment, the way that things are going, they won't. Now, one of the things that Extinction Rebellion says that has been controversial is to do with the risk of human extinction. So I'll go through that now just briefly. We're seeing food and water shortages already, and we're seeing out of that conflict exacerbated and mass migrations. And you can see how just 1 million climate refugees, or refugees, not all climate refugees, coming from Africa to Europe have destabilised things there. It's very hard to cope with even 1 million, but we're looking at hundreds of millions, billions of people on the move, dislocated, not able to farm or have enough water where they are. And out of this, nations are building walls. This is a wall that India has built around Bangladesh, and they patrol it with 80,000 troops, and they shoot 800 people a year that are trying to go over. And part of the reason that people are trying to go over, not the whole reason, but part of the reason is to do with what's happening in Bangladesh. Those red bits are the low-lying areas. So as sea level rises, you've got the sea taking over some of their prime food growing areas, and you've got the salt getting into the croplands. And this is in America. Again, you know, Trump's building a wall. Why are those people coming up from South America? It's partly because of things like the coffee crop failing. Why did the coffee crop fail? It's because little bugs that usually would die off in the cold nights are not dying off anymore. And the coffee crop's destroyed, and that's the end of some people's livelihoods. So yeah, masses of people on the move. And so what we're seeing with the collapse of some of the societies in Africa is a bit of a window into what could happen to us, the collapse of human civilization. And again, this is a warning back from 2010. Virtually all of us climatologists are now convinced that global warming poses a clear and present danger to civilization. And Professor Schellenhuber, again, his estimate, like we don't know, is that if we get to 4 degrees warmer, the Earth can only support about 1 billion. So that's about somewhere between 6 and 7 billion that have died somewhere along the track, this horrific decline. And we don't know exactly who those people are that will survive or might survive. You know, it could be the wealthiest, or it could just be the most violent. Because once human civilization, organised society starts to break down, it gets very ugly. This is a sort of euphemistic way of saying it, but this is the World Bank. There's no certainty that adaptation to a 4 degrees warmer world is possible. That's how that World Bank says it. This is partly why people don't get it, because they're not saying clearly, most people are going to die if you go down this road path. If you go down this road, most people are going to die. They're not saying it clearly enough, right? So, of course, having heard what the scientists were up to, what did I do? Went to buy some land in Tasmania. But it's always tempting, isn't it, to go for the individual solution? How is it going to work, though? I thought I was pretty excited about this individual solution until someone said, and you've got to get your kids machine gun lessons too. Because if civilization breaks down, nobody cares that you own that block of land. And no, I'm not going to give my kids machine gun lessons, and I don't think they'll be much good at it, and I don't think I might be much good at it. If it all starts falling apart, our block of land's not going to save us in Tasmania. So that's, in summary, that's the good news and the bad news. Like, we've never had an issue where the whole of the world basically has the same interest. Like, we have to act across the whole world to save ourselves. I mean, the pandemic is like a practice run, because this is something, again, that does affect rich and poor across every country. And if we want to get it under control, ideally we act together. But it's even clearer with the planet. Unless we act together, we cannot make these enormous changes that we have to make. So Whereas if you frame it as, oh, we want to stop Adani, and they go, no, you greenies, we want the jobs. You know, it can be an us and them thing. Like, do we want Adani or don't we want Adani? Do we want Adani? We don't want Adani. When it's life and death, that sort of right, left, us and them thing, usually with a bit of luck, is put aside. And you just get on with saving yourselves. So now we've gone down to the bottom of the pit. This is where you ideally would get into small groups and talk amongst yourselves. So I feel a bit bad because you're each sort of isolated in your separate room there. All those years when I knew how bad it was, I really couldn't think what to do. Like, I couldn't really think what was a proportionate response. I mean, one of the things we did in 2016 was launch a petition to declare a climate emergency. And it's gone quite well. And in the end, you know, a petition went up with 400,000 signatures and quite a few councils have declared an emergency. So that's a sort of start, but it's not really proportionate. Like, it's not like the kind of action that people take when it's a pandemic. So, this is David Attenborough, his view. He says, based on what he sees in nature, we cannot be radical enough in dealing with the issues that face us. So, what does radical action look like? These are some of the people who got Extinction Rebellion started. So Roger Hallam and Gal Bradbrook, you've probably seen before. Farhana Yamina and Kofi and Claire Farrell. There's some of the others. There were about 15 of them. And they came out of an organisation called Rising Up. And sometimes people go, oh, it's such a white middle class movement. Well, Roger and Gail both came from working class backgrounds, and some of the others really hate being called white middle class people. It was quite a diverse group right from the start, which is not to say perfectly diverse. And 3 demands, which you've probably heard. First is the government must tell the truth by declaring a climate and ecological emergency and communicating that. So this is an idea from Margaret Klein Salomon in the United States, climate mobilisation. It's the idea we've got to move into emergency mode. And you've seen it with the pandemic. With all this stuff that was impossible before, suddenly it's possible. And it's the same, you know, things can seem really hard and really complicated, and then the stove catches fire and boom, you're in emergency mode. Nothing else matters. You just do whatever has to be done. So it's this idea of a focus of doing whatever has to be done. And most of the time, when it's really life and death, people do come together. Even in Australia, we've seen Sally McManus working with Christian Porter. Now, what could be more extreme than that? But when it's life and death, people do tend to come together. Not always, but with good leadership, they come together. So these are people in Brisbane, after the Brisbane floods, 33,000 of them cleaning up the streets, dirty, tired, probably sore, and having a great time because they're doing something that's meaningful. So that's number 1. Number 2, halt biodiversity loss and reduce greenhouse gas emissions to net zero by 2025. Some people say it's impossible, and look, it might be. To me, it's just code for as fast as humanly possible. But until you move into emergency mode, you don't actually know what's possible, do you? So we just got to start reducing emissions as fast as we can and doing the carbon capture and doing storage of the emissions, sucking the emissions out of the atmosphere and putting them in the ground. So there's lots of solutions to reduce emissions. I'm sure you're pretty familiar with them, renewable energy and bikes and all that. I think people often like to imagine that it's going to be just a very gradual sort of transition, you know, a few more solar panels here, we're going to have electric cars, we're still going to keep changing our iPhones every 2 years and having fast fashion. Well, I don't think so. It could be fast, it could be slow, it could be bumpy, it could be smooth. But I think by the end of this transition, society's going to look a lot different, not just in terms of being cleaner, but I think also in terms of being simpler. And we're getting, again, a taste of it during the virus time. The drawdown methods that we need are mostly the natural drawdown methods. We can make a large difference just with rewilding, regrowing trees, biochar, and changing how we do farming, particularly regenerative agriculture. If we farm in particular ways, we can get a lot of carbon in the ground that way. If we go slow, that's when we need to build the machines. So look, it's no use pretending that it's going to be just a bit of that and life goes on as normal. It's going to be more like the transition we've seen during the pandemic, except that we probably can go outside and hug each other. That would be nice. But it's not going to be a little change. It's going to be a big change. So in the same way as during the pandemic, there's been factories that used to make something else and now they're making ventilators. And in wartime, there's factories that used to make cars and then they're making tanks. And there's factories that were making toys, but now they're making guns. It's going to be that kind of transition where you try and do everything at the same time really fast. And like we've seen in the pandemic, how you can just find the money when you really have to. It's the same thing that happened in the war. So in the US, military spending went from 1% of national income to 42%. In Germany, it went from 22% to 70%. And if you looked at the spending around here during the pandemic, you'd see the same kind of massive surge from what people thought was possible. The good thing about the rewilding and the regrowth of the forests is that it draws down the carbon, puts it back in the ground, but it also helps with the biodiversity. So that's demand number 2. And look, the third one, I wasn't too sure about it at first. I'd never heard of a citizens' assembly. Why do we want a citizens' assembly? One thing I think we can agree on is our political system's broken. Supposedly we just had the climate election, but it was an election where Clive Palmer spent 80 billion telling us don't trust Shifty. So we elected the guy with the lump of coal. The incredible concentration of media ownership and their incredible willingness to lie is a large part of the story. And it's not like our system has been broken just for a short time. We've got the whole history of colonialism to remind us it's been broken for a long time. And did anyone really vote for the oil wars? Like, we keep on going into these wars about oil, and yet I think if you ask most of the population, they never would have supported it. So the trouble we've got with our political system is that although most people agree about really quite a bit, like that the system's broken, like that you can't have infinite growth on a finite planet, like that we want to leave a habitable planet. So this is like Occupy said, we're the 99%, but there's a lot of things about these universal values that are just not reflected in our political system. It's like the voice of ordinary people just can't really get in past the influence of all those vested interests. So that's the point of citizens' assembly. They're a bit like jury duty in the sense that people are randomly selected. They're randomly selected to be representative of the broader population. And what they are typically used for is to deliberate on things where the politicians are paralysed, where the vested interests are so scary that politicians just can't move. And of course, climate is one of those. So they're advised by experts and they're helped to not be all sort of tribal and fixed in their views, and to have a genuine deliberative process. And it tends to work quite well. So they did one on nuclear waste in South Australia. They've done them on equal marriage and abortion law reform in Ireland. And citizen assemblies just tend to come out with ordinary common sense. And ordinary common sense includes we don't want to die. We don't want our kids to be in a planet that's destroyed. So citizens assemblies is a way of filtering the voice of the people into the government. So that's what we're trying for, but I can tell you a petition's not going to be the answer in terms of how to get it. So this is the bit about it's time to rebel. Now, I've talked about the depressing tipping points for climate, but this is an idea from Paul Gilding, that there's social tipping points as well. Like you can keep going, campaigning, nothing's happening, then boom, suddenly everything changes. So the school strike is a classic example. It's hard to believe, but it was August 2018 only that Greta was one kid outside the Swedish Parliament. Now, I think in September it was something like 7 million. So that's extraordinary exponential growth. And Extinction Rebellion is the same. And part of Greta's amazing campaigning skill is, of course, her incredible emergency messaging. I want you to act like our house is on fire, because it is. It's such a beautiful, simple way to encapsulate the emergency message. So many movements have got stuck sort of where we are, where they've done the petitions, they've done the lobbying, they've had the big marches, and still, even though it's a very just cause, they've not been able to win. So this is things like the civil rights movement in the US and like the suffragettes campaign for the votes for women. And it's been mass civil disobedience that's pushed these issues through to a win. This is Martin Luther King. It's actually, again, when it's life and death, people from really quite a broad cross-section of the political spectrum can see that actually it's an obligation to rebel when that's the only thing you can do to save people. So we've got a tradition of civil disobedience, and in Australia this was the Franklin Dam. Some of you might remember it. This was 2 years of road blockages up in the Kimberley to stop the gas hub. And this was the Bentley blockade as part of Lock the Gate. Civil disobedience is powerful, and this is a study done by Erica Chenoweth and Maria Steffen, and they looked at 323 uprisings, and basically they found that the ones that were non-violent were more likely to succeed than the violent ones, and even if the violent ones did succeed, they were more often followed by totalitarianism or something that really was had elements of violence in it. So that's very encouraging. And another very encouraging statistic from that same work is the idea that only 1 to 3% of the population needs to be mobilised to bring about a massive social change. You need the rest ideally agreeing, and supportive. But in terms of the people who get on the streets and shut the city down, it's only a relatively small number. So Roger Hallam was an organic farmer, but he quit farming when he had great trouble with his farm with the weather. And he did a PhD on social change. So those figures down the bottom, they're actually sort of his estimates, that 500 people in jail or 5,000 people arrested, which is quite a few, is about equivalent to getting 1 million people on the streets. Now, we've tried to do some big street marches in Australia. We never had 1 million people on the street. It's quite hard. And I don't know, as someone who's tried to organise big marches, I found this actually quite encouraging, particularly the 5,000 people. It just seems to me a lot more doable in Australia to have mass civil disobedience like they did with the Franklin Dam, and just hundreds or even thousands of people willing to go to jail, clogging up the system. I think in the end, that's how we can win. So we're rebelling for life. And yeah, like I said, this is a movement, Extinction Rebellion, that came out of Rising Up. That's Roger there, spray painting. And this is people with smoke flares. Isn't that incredible? Look at this guy's mouth. See, they've only got 2 or 3 people there doing a quite small action, but very startling. Just that slightly confronting aspect to it. This again, this is Gail. So this is one of the other main founders of Extinction Rebellion. This is her outside the Murdoch Press during a UK election, and spray painted on the window. Did a little video. Police are standing there ready to arrest her. She said, "Oh, it's only chalk paint. We'll clean it off." Didn't arrest her. 150,000 people viewed the video. So this is the things they were experimenting during those 2 years as Rising Up. But in 2018, basically, Extinction Rebellion split off from Rising Up to focus on the climate emergency, climate and ecological emergency. And the first thing they did was to basically go and do talks like this, just all over the UK. And tell people, look, we're going to be in London in October. Are you with us? Are you willing to get arrested? And the people who said they were willing to come to London and perhaps get arrested, they got into affinity groups. So this is them practicing. They're blocking a little street just near in their neighbourhood. And the idea is to get people doing that sort of fairly fast, so that that little group of 10 or 12 or 20 get to know each other, get to trust each other, get confident about doing police liaison, get confident that you really can block the road and you're not going to get run over, that the cars will stop. And it's a practice. The aim is not to disrupt this little town or this little suburb, wherever they are. It's to practice so that they're confident, they're ready, they're bonded, they're a well-functioning group, and they're ready to go to London in October. So in October, they told the UK government, unless you declare a climate emergency, we're going to rebel. And Greta came down for the launch. They waited, but by the 17th of November, the government, of course, had not declared a climate emergency, so they began the rebellion. And it was with 6,000 people they had at that stage, blockading 5 bridges, 70 arrests. And it really was just 2 or 3 hours. It was just the start of the rebellion. But it inspired people all around the world, and groups began forming all around the world from that moment, including in Australia. In the months after that, they kept on working, and one of the things they did was join a campaign that we actually started here in Australia to get councils to declare an emergency. It's now 1,400, but they were the ones who pushed London over the edge to get an emergency declared in London. They continued this tradition of the very spectacular action. So this is blood of our children. Fake blood, non-toxic, 24 people willing to get arrested. A very striking, emotional sort of protest. Front page of The Guardian. But in the end, nobody actually was arrested. So they were building and getting ready, still doing more talks, getting more commitments, getting ready for the next wave of rebellion, which was the international rebellion. And then I think Extinction Rebellion was in 70 countries. So in London, in April, they occupied the streets in 5 locations, but not just for a few hours, for 11 days, with over 1,000 arrests, and with very creative and daring tactics like this pink boat, which they got into position in one of the intersections, then had all this fun entertainment like you can see, and as well as speeches and things. But when the police would come in to try and take the boat, they would glue their hands to it. And so it actually took the police days and days to work out how to get this pink boat out of this intersection. And similarly, on another bridge, there was a big truck where they had all sorts of performances. But again, people with their hands glued to it underneath made it very hard to remove. And the important thing about it was that really after those 11 days of disruption, the UK government did declare an environment and climate emergency. Like, it hardly got in the news in Australia. I don't even know if you had heard that. But those 11 days were actually remarkably successful. And it's partly to do with the participation of people like these, people from religious groups, some people that ordinary people identify as not the usual suspects. So they've declared an emergency. They, of course, haven't done all the things that need to be done to go with that, but that was a pretty amazing victory for just that, really the second wave of rebellion for them. So a feature of their actions and ours is that they're fun. They're designed to engage ordinary people and make people want to be there and want to keep coming back and doing more. They're beautiful. These are red rebels. Again, all around Australia, all around the world, there's red rebels now. There's a culture of really trying to look after each other and create the kind of world inside the rebellion that we want to see in terms of how people treat each other. And again, surprisingly, in a movement that's so disruptive, there's efforts to have family-friendly spaces. Again, this is this feeling of it being a movement of the 99% that anyone can imagine being part of. And the children and the families are in safe, non-arrestable positions, but they're a part of the action. This again is another of their very dramatic actions. This is during a Brexit debate, and I actually heard about this driving around in my car here in Melbourne. So this was 13 rebels in the Brexit debate, partly undressed. This guy is dressed as an elephant, that's his elephant ears, and they're calling out, "You're wasting our time, we're going to die." No, they did get arrested, but still, like, it's a very good use of 13 people's willingness to be arrested. It's very dramatic action that went all around the world, and daring. Now, the aim of the mass mobilisation of taking to the streets is to pose a dilemma where the government has to either just let you be in the street, or they have to somehow get you off the street. And if they are trying to get you off the street, sometimes this thing will happen where they overreact. So this is an example of them overreacting. So this is actually a bridge in Paris. And you can see that people have been given a chance to move off. So some people have moved off and the others have basically refused to move. And they're actually getting, that's the orange there, they're getting pepper sprayed. So it's a very serious overreaction really to pepper spray people who are sitting there really obviously, completely peacefully. And what happened with that is really quite a powerful backlash. So this is Greta's tweet about it, 4,760,000 views. So either they let you stay on the streets, which after 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 days is sort of awkward, or they overreact, which with luck will bring more people to join you, as long as it's completely clear that you're completely peaceful. So a large part of the thinking behind Extinction Rebellion is to do with mass mobilisation, but also to do with a style of civil disobedience that involves behaving with respect to everyone, to each other and to the police. And some people find that controversial. It's not like a naivety. It's not sort of saying, oh, the police are nice, you know, every policeman's nice, every police person, you know, behaves well. Because of course we've had, you know, Aboriginal deaths in custody and we've had them sprayed in the bridge in Paris. It's not an illusion. It's not a sort of imagining. It's a tactical decision that if you behave with respect, then any overreaction by the police will bring people to join you. Whereas if you're behaving violently or if you're shouting and swearing, then people will not come and join you. They don't care what the police do to you. So yeah, this is somebody in New Zealand, and I'm just guessing what she's saying with that, you know, hand gesture. But the typical thing that people will say is, look, you're doing your job, I'm doing mine. I'm trying to save the planet for your kids too. It's a line that seems to work pretty well. So it's a decentralized movement, and it's a self-organizing system. That's how it's been able to spread to 70 countries. And it's based on a set of principles and values. So you can organize as Extinction Rebellion, but you have to accept the demands and the principles and values. If you come to an induction session, there'll be more on those. So from early last year, we did have an Extinction Rebellion in Australia, and this is us in Melbourne at the footy doing a banner drop. That was a lot of fun. Hardest thing was to get the banners in through the bag search. But anyway, we did, and there they are. This was a die-in in Burke Street. And then, of course, we had the Spring Rebellion in October. Again, aiming to get the faith groups involved. Red Rebels in Melbourne. And lots of arrests. We held the streets for several hours at a time, but we were a year behind. That's how we think about it. We're a year behind the UK. So we held the streets for an hour or 2 or 3 at a time. But for most of the days that week, we had a camp in Carlton near the exhibition buildings. We weren't ready to really have a prolonged blockade where we held the streets for a week. But we were working towards that for May. Of course, that's not happening now. So yeah, that's a mock funeral, some of our beautiful flags. This was a semi-nude walk march that we did, including through some of the arcades, lovely rebel. With, again, you can see that the warmth and that we're reaching out with, and you can see the warmth and the interest that you get from passers-by. People are not put off. They want to come and take your leaflet. They want to find out what's going on, partly because we have that warmth and vulnerability in this case. So this was actually an underwear shop where she was handing out. Okay, and towards the end of the week, we did civil disobedience. Again, this is a Melbourne innovation that's gone viral around the world. Now XR groups all around the world do civil disobedience. So on Friday, after blocking the streets in other ways, we actually blocked the streets with disco to the tune of Staying Alive, Staying Alive. Okay, and look, some people say, oh, but you know, you're going to make people so cross. Well, look, there's no doubt that some people who are actually held up just right there get cross. But this was a very critical article in The Age about commuters being furious. And yet, at the end of it, we had, I can't see the percentages because of where I am, but I think it was 83 or 84% anyway, over 80% of people saying yes. They actually, not just saying they believe it's a climate emergency, they're actually saying they support the Extinction Rebellion protests. That was out of 135,000 people who responded to that. Now, it's age readers, right? So, look, it's not everyone, but we don't need everyone to like us. We just need people to know it's an emergency. And often what happened with the suffragettes was people would say, oh, we don't like their methods, but of course their cause is fine. You know, so if people in the end say about Extinction Rebellion, oh, we didn't like that they blocked the city. Oh, but we recognise now that it's an emergency. That's a very fine outcome. We don't need everyone to like us. But the interesting thing is that quite often they do, because they realise that we're willing to sacrifice for something that we believe in. So straight after our Spring Rebellion, there were 3 motions that went up to the lower house and one to the upper house. One was going up anyway. It was a Greens backbench one. But 2 of them, I think, came directly out of the rebellion. Again, not a lot of news coverage, but still. And they didn't pass. So the 2 in the lower house were narrowly defeated. And the one in the Senate was drawn. But a draw is not enough to get it up. And this was one of the amazing things that came. Like, Labor was still reeling from their election defeat. They were in the process of looking at maybe weakening their climate policy. They suddenly came out with their own Twitter campaign saying they were going to declare a climate emergency in their own motion. This was very surprising, and I think directly came out of the Spring Rebellion. There's no other way of accounting for it. And similarly, we've been slogging away on a petition for 2 or 3 years by that point. We've got about 100,000 signatures. In just 2 or 3 weeks after the Spring Rebellion, 400,000 signed a petition to Parliament. So I think we really were starting to shift that window. So again, this is the question. I don't know. All I can do, we can't put you in small groups. Well, not very easy, especially the Facebook people. But people I can see, I mean, how many people think that you might be willing to get arrested? Maybe. To risk arrest, you see. Like, mostly you stand on the road, with a banner, or you sit down and you're risking arrest. But 99% you'll get a warning, like, you must move now or we will start arresting you. Do you understand we are about to start arresting you? At that point you can move off or you can stay, and then you really possibly will get arrested. Okay, so I saw some hands go up. That's nice. Because I'm a psychologist, my initial thought was I wouldn't get arrested because I was worried I'd have to defend my registration. You know, if you've had a conviction, you've got to tell the registration board. So anyway, I got arrested before the Spring Rebellion. I had to tell the registration board this year. They sent me a letter to ask me if I'd reformed myself and if I thought I was going to bring the profession into disrepute. And I said I didn't think it was. I didn't think I was, and I'm still registered. So that's good. I think there's been also doctors and, you know, quite a number of health professionals arrested, and we're not bringing the profession into disrepute. We're doing what needs to be done, and I think the registration board recognises that. But look, even if you're not willing to be arrested, or, you know, there's people who just really can't risk it. For every one person that's willing to be arrested, we need 10 or 20 or 30 to help. Like, we need the people who make the flags. We need the people who do the talks. We need the people who run the social media. There's 1,000 other roles. Well, there's usually 1,000 other roles. Everything, of course, just changed. Like, we were working up to this big blockade in May, and then we all got locked down. So we're in this one together as well, but everything is a bit different for a bit. So we've got to find other ways to rebel. And I think it's really important that we don't slack off. So that's why I'm really glad that we do have some people still coming and doing the intro talk, even though, you know, like, there's people I know just really impatient to go on the streets. But we had this incredible opportunity, I think, during this coronavirus period, because it is, like, we didn't bring it on, like, we didn't bring on this crisis. But during big upheavals like this, during wars, during depressions, during pandemics, this is when everything changes. But it changes for better or for worse, you know. And it depends on how powerful we are, how powerful the sort of forces of light are in this period, how much we can come out of this with, some people are calling it build back better. Like, there's going to be need for all this money to be spent as we come out of this to rebuild the economy. And we can do a large part of this transition with the transition money if we can campaign strong enough and be influential enough in this period. There's no doubt it's going to be completely different. We just don't know whether it's going to be better or worse. So what can we do? Well, one of the things we're working on is paint the streets. Like, even that's a little bit, you know, limited now in the sense that you could only do it while you were going for a walk. But if you were going for a walk, that's possible, a little bit of stenciling. This one is being done by rock posters. I don't know who's organising it, but we've got some giant posters going up around the place. Just raise some money and get rock posters to post it for you. That's another thing we can do during the period of lockdown. This is a little house sign that someone's just got in their window. That's easy enough and very powerful as a communication from you to your neighbours. This is something I believe in. This is mine. I just did these. I've just done that by sort of printing out some lettering and then copying it on and putting some paint in the background. That bit up the top, that's just, I just printed that out and stuck it on because it's too hard to copy the logo. But look, anything that you put up anywhere that's got Extinction Rebellion on it, you wouldn't believe how powerful, how afraid people are of us. Just recently we were going to do a little protest outside Exxon Mobil's open day. They cancelled the whole open day. Like, we had, I don't know how many we had going. It wasn't really that many, and we didn't even have that much of a clear plan exactly how we were going to disrupt it, I don't think. But anyway, it got shut down. There was a forest consultation. We were going to do a die-in just on the lawn at the front. They shut down the whole consultation for fear of us. So just putting Extinction Rebellion in chalk on the pavement outside your house, I think at this point, one of the most powerful things we can do is just to give the impression we're everywhere. So some of you sound like you've already done these things. If you're not already getting the newsletter, that's the one. Just fill in that one up the top. You'll get a questionnaire thing about which state you're in and what's your postcode and things like that. That will get you the Victorian newsletter. I think everyone's in Victoria. If you actually want to help us organise, you've got to go to the base. There you'll find all the local groups, and you'll find chats about postering and stenciling, and you'll find chats about strategy. You'll find chats about everything, basically. And you can find out also what's going on in other states there. If you want to be part of a team, like, you know, if you want to help with media or you want to help with talks, you'll find people that you can connect with there. I suggest you also sign up with for the international news, just because it's interesting. You know, it's interesting to find out what's happening in all the other countries, and we don't always cover it. So there you go. And if we were all in the same room, I don't think it's going to be the same over the internet, but if we were all in the same room, I'd go Extinction and you'd go Rebellion. And I'd go Extinction and you'd go Rebellion.
Rebellion.
That's it. Extinction. Mike's going
Rebellion.
Rebellion.